All right, we have to go out to Chicago now. Matthew Luallen, founder of Encari, is with us to talk about cybersecurity. Matthew, this is something that I'm very interested in because I don't feel like we pay enough attention to this stuff.
Yeah, thanks for having me on the show. Specifically, we do computer security for critical infrastructure and electric utilities. There's been a lot of work over the past 4 or 5 years that we've been doing for a lot of different organizations here in the U.S.
So how would you describe our preparedness then, Matthew, with regard to a cyber attack? I mean, these people are very clever. Do we have the necessary tools in place to prevent an attack?
Well, there's prevention and then, of course, deterrence and then response. And there has been a lot of work done over the past 5 years in trying to assure that we have the right controls in place. The challenge is to do that across our entire power grid here in North America, which includes over 200,000 miles of transmission lines, lots of different electric utilities, lots of different investor-owned utilities, publicly owned, small and large, and it makes it very difficult to cover that entire space with the right controls and the right type of response if something were to occur.
Let's talk about what could happen. What are the dangers to our grids right now?
Well, the greatest risk, of course, would be one is the potential outage scenario where you could create a blackout, similar to events that happened back in August of 2003 or more recently down in Florida a couple years ago. But both of those were not because of cyber activities, but that would be an example of something that could occur. The other concern, of course, is potentially using the grid itself against the devices that connect to the grid. Potentially causing not only a disruption but also a destruction of some of the devices that are associated with it. So it can be massive in scale. There have been situations around the world where this has occurred, such as more recently October down in Brazil where there was a substantial outage, but again that was not directly linked to a cyber event.
Well, Matthew, what should people do to be prepared for something like this?
For preparedness, I think it's just to try to be aware of where cyber is, where are computers, and how are they being used in our everyday lives, whether it's for the power grid, whether it's for our water systems, whether it's for our transportation systems, our own heating and cooling systems. Computers are everywhere. So it really, everybody needs to be aware of what would happen if there happened to be a disruption. So what if you didn't happen to have electricity for a 24-hour period, or if you didn't happen to have a vehicle for 24 hours, or if there wasn't gasoline? So it's just to be prepared and aware whether the event is from cyber activity, a natural disaster, as we've been seeing, of course, with some of the heat waves, and just knowing what to have on hand if something were to happen. The final piece that we really push is awareness in general, where since cyber is so integrated in our daily lives, we really need to develop a sixth sense. So instead of the traditional 5 senses we're used to, we have to directly understand cybersecurity ramifications and educate that in our families and households more than just the Facebooks, the MySpaces of information, but also of control risks, of physical world ramifications that could occur.
And Matthew, are the individual states responsible, or the individual utilities responsible for their own security, or they come under a federal umbrella?
So this falls underneath FERC. FERC is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, who then directs NERC, the North American Reliability Corporation, with certain reliability standards that they have to abide by. Or face potential risks up to $1 million per non-compliant requirement per day. So there are substantial
But they're not
uniform
deterrent systems then, so you could argue that one state could be more vulnerable than another.
Right now there are 8 different regions across the U.S. that are doing the compliance audits against those reliability standards, but there can be a challenge that those audits and the reviews aren't necessarily uniform in nature. That's correct.
Matthew, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on the show.
Matthew Luallen, founder of Encari out in Chicago. I mean, to me, if I'm a terrorist,
yeah,
I'd go right for the